All right. All right. So it's got a few folks here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. We're gonna give it a few more minutes and give everyone a chance to join in here. So just stand by for a few, and we will get going here in just a minute or two.
Is this still the wrong one?
Still the wrong one?
I don't understand.
You are signing in as Veterans Education Project and not as your own personal Zoom, Deanna. But I'm glad you're here, Deanna. But yes, please, you're gonna sign on your own Zoom. As we get going today, everybody, there should be a section where you can do Q&A. You can ask a question, submit a question to us. Around after the presentation with Jason, we'll be taking questions from everyone. We'll answer as many as we can. Just throw them into that question and answer window, and we will answer those as best we can. I see Will Hubbard here. Well, no Walter though. Walter is usually the one who grills us on these things. I miss seeing him. I hope he can make it. If he didn't get an invite, make sure he does, Will. Well, also, this is also being recorded, so we'll also be posting this on our Facebook channels and our LinkedIn channels. So if anyone would be interested, we'll definitely be posting them up there as well. All right. I think we got a few more folks here too. That's great. All right, well, I'll get us started. Everyone, thank you for coming. Really appreciate you guys taking the time. Really excited about this study. We worked with Jason on a couple other things, but this is the first time we've been working with the Urban Institute and the full backing of that. So I'm excited to hear their results. The study we did and we wanted to learn about was, and folks here may or may not know, is that if you are attending a school using GI Bill benefits or any sort of military benefits, whether you're in or not, if you are there full-time in person, you get a certain set of benefits. But if you go and you're attending online full-time, you get half of those benefits, particularly for your monthly housing allowance, as they call MHA or BAH, depending who you ask. But we wanted to research and find out what the impact of that having those benefits was going to have on the service members and veterans and their families, as well as what maybe that could impact how their attendance goes, the debt they get into, their graduation rates, all those things. So without further ado, Jason, Delisle, if you kind of want to introduce yourself and the Urban Institute, and kind of we'll take it from there.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. I'm Jason Delisle. I'm a non-resident fellow at the Urban Institute, where I work on higher education policy, and occasionally work on some issues related to GI Bill benefits and veterans benefits for higher education. So, this issue came to my attention a while back. The fact that students who receive a GI Bill benefit and want to go online receive again, I think the distinction here is, right, if they're exclusively online, their housing benefit is reduced, their monthly housing benefit is reduced. So what I think is I think it's interesting here, some of the sort of history is that, housing benefits, for online in the GI Bill benefit program were added later, right? This isn't, if Steve, jump in if you want to clarify anything on some of this, but they were added later. Congress added them later. So it was an acknowledgement that online is it's a real thing. It's a real way to pursue a higher education. And I think what's interesting too is that, obviously today, where many of us work entirely remotely, or at least partially remotely, and definitely during the pandemic, almost everybody was remote. So again, there's this sort of acknowledgement that online isn't some sort of unusual or strange way to pursue a higher education. So Congress clearly acknowledging that, adding that as a benefit to the GI Bill, the housing benefit. But what I think is, sort of strange here is Congress saying, yes, we'll add a benefit for housing if you're attending exclusively online, because you still need to live somewhere, even if you're going to school online. And the education is virtual, your living situation is not, right? But there's this provision that, as best I can tell, comes out of nowhere, and it's a provision saying the benefits are half. Now, the calculation, I mean, for many of you attending, obviously know the calculation for what the housing benefit is, if you're not exclusively online, is based on a Department of Defense formula, based on a rank, and also based on your specific location. And so the veterans housing benefit, the GI Bill housing benefit is keyed off of that. But there's another interesting piece here, another sort of strange, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, I would call it kind of sloppy policymaking. The housing benefit for someone attending exclusively online is not half what it would be based on where you're living. So it's not the benefit that you would get if you were attending in person, or at least some classes in person, based on this formula and location. It's half the national average calculation. So it's almost in two ways, it is sort of disconnected from what your actual housing costs will be. And so my sense is, in looking at, now, again, you can scour the internet and ask around and try to figure out what was the rationale for this policy. I came up pretty empty-handed. And it doesn't seem like, whatever the basis was for the decision, it seems to have not been well documented. And so it's hard to know what Congress was thinking. We can sort of speculate on what they were thinking. I mean, I don't want to completely, sort of paper over the concerns that lawmakers have had around the history of veterans sort of being taken advantage of by fly-by-night and fraudulent institutions. And it's possible, although it still doesn't make a whole lot of sense, that the reduced housing benefit for students attending exclusively online was somehow meant to protect veterans from, dubious education or fraudulent education, or protect them from institutions essentially just offering these benefits because students could collect, offering online programs because students could collect a large benefit, and the benefit is, in this case, is not even flowing to the institution. So, like I said, I can't quite figure out where the policy came from. Not sure if it makes sense, but there's what we did in the paper is we sort of took two approaches. I mean, one is just the mechanically, how does this policy work, and does it make much sense? And so we show, for example, if you are in living in a high cost area, where, say, your maximum monthly housing benefit, if you qualify for the full GI Bill based on length of service, it might be something like $2,300. But if you are attending, so it's above average cost nationally, right? I think nationally, the monthly housing benefit, the maximum is something around $2,000, right? So if we have $2,400, and you are enrolled exclusively online, your maximum monthly housing benefit is just shy of $1,000. So it's less than half of what you'd be getting if you're doing it online. Now, here's the really perverse part of this. And there's anecdotal evidence of veterans saying this is the case, but this is clearly the perverse incentive. if you're a veteran and you add one class in person, so you're otherwise taking an online program, but at the at a local campus or wherever it may be, you sign up for one in-person class in your course in that semester, suddenly you qualify for the full housing benefit. And so, you know, and the anecdotal evidence is sort of veterans saying, well, if I add just one of these classes, I could potentially pick up over $1,000 more a month if they're getting the maximum benefit. And you know, that that's clearly the incentive before someone that the policy sets up, and that doesn't, again, back to the why. What is the purpose of encouraging someone to do that? You know, and in sort of gaining a better understanding of the policy and trying to find the origins of it, and looking at some of the other literature, I thought it was really interesting. The Government Accountability Office was doing focus groups with veterans receiving the GI Bill, you know, asking them about their experiences and how well the program works for them. And one of the things in those focus groups was disabled veterans saying how important it is for them to be able to attend online. And you sort of realize, yeah, I mean, exactly, right? This is a benefit that actually should be tailored to disabled veterans, you know, and they are going to be more likely to want to attend online for a whole bunch of reasons, you know. And so
were you able to get some decent demographics on the students that attend online?
So we are not the data that we use for the study. So again, as I was saying, so two parts. Well, one is just sort of mechanically, how does this work and what's the logic behind it? But the other piece is sort of what data are there that can tell us something about veterans attending online. There are not a lot of data. The data source that we use for the study is a sort of highly regarded representative sample of the whole undergraduate population. And one of the challenges with that data set, there are students in there who are veterans, and we know that they are receiving GI Bill benefits because the data set, which is run by the Department of Education, is crosswalked with the Veterans Administration. And so we know that those students are indeed receiving veterans benefits. It becomes difficult though, because veterans are still a pretty small share of the undergraduate population. It's hard for us to drill down much deeper in the data to see what the demographics are of the students attending online.
This data set you referenced, where is it from?
It's the Department of Education. It's from the National Center for Education and Statistics, and the data set is called the National Post-Secondary Student AIDS Study. It's done every 4 years. Again, big random sample, representative sample of students, lots of information about the schools they're attending.
So the only conjecture you can make is say, if the veterans population attendance mirrored that of the general populace, then you could maybe make some guesses, but you don't really know. The veteran population is different than the general populace.
Yeah, absolutely. But what we find though is that veterans do. I mean, this is one of some of the first tables and charts we put in the paper. Is, I mean, veterans are much more inclined to attend online. So, and again, most of the statistics I'll cite today and that we cite in the paper are for veterans attending full time. And the reason why we make that distinction is that you can't receive the housing benefit if you're attending half-time or less. And so we have to look at people attending more than half-time. And in our data set, that's full-time. I mean, we can't see, you know, 3/4 time, you know, something like that. But generally full-time, more than half-time is often full-time. And so that's what we're working with here. So we find that veterans attending full-time are, you know, about 17% of them, I believe is a statistic, I'll make sure I get it right, about 15% attend exclusively online. And they're attending exclusively online at a higher rate than the general undergraduate population, which is about 9%. Now, the the distinction here, though, is that so right off, you might think, oh, well, so our veterans are just more likely to attend online than other students. Yes, but there's additional factors here. Veterans who are attending online or veterans attending with a GI Bill benefit are going to be independent students, by definition. And so if we look, at just independent students, veterans attend online, exclusively online at about the same rate as other independent students. So essentially here that, the older students, or I guess what sometimes we call less traditional, but independent students are much more likely to seek out an online education. So now it's still not the majority, although the data that we have the most recent data we have are actually pretty old. They're from 2016. That's the most recent data that we have on this. And you can also see in the chart, though, but that has been trending up. We put, back in 2003, 2004, it was 6% of full-time veterans receiving a GI Bill benefit attending online. So, we've gone up almost 3 times that. And I would imagine that, again, that's 2016. I would imagine that today, it's a much higher share. And we'll get new data soon, and maybe we update some of these charts.
Fantastic. So as you started working through this data set and these different things, what were some of the stuff that kind of jumped out at you?
Well, I think one of the interesting pieces was we are able to see in the data, since we have data from the Veterans Administration, from the students' actual benefits that they received in GI Bill. We can also see housing benefit. It's hard to disaggregate the housing benefit from the tuition payments, but we can do some work with the data on that, and we get a sense of how much students attending exclusively online are receiving in housing benefits versus the students who are not. And here the data pretty much line up with what you'd expect, that the students attending fully online are receiving what looks like a reduced benefit. They're receiving less in a housing benefit than the students who are attending either fully brick and mortar in person or some mix of in person and online. So you can see it there. The other thing, though, that's interesting is in this data set, in the interviews with the students, that the statisticians do, who build this survey for the National Center for Education Statistics, is they do an interview with students, a lengthy interview, and they ask them what they're paying in rent and what their mortgage payment is. So we actually can see now what students who are receiving a GI Bill benefit and attending fully online, we can see what they say their housing costs and what their rent is, and is it lower? I mean, what's interesting is I've mentioned to people, that we look at this, and of course, the finding is that their housing costs are not low. Their housing costs, they report them, their rent and their mortgage, they say, and again, they aren't being, this is just a, big survey question. They aren't being like primed to is your housing payment adequate or not? They're essentially just being, what is your month? What is your monthly rent? What's your mortgage? But this goes back to this sort of mysterious rationale for the policy that I was talking about earlier. Why did Congress reduce this benefit? Why did they say it needs to be half? And maybe lawmakers thought that people attending online have lower living expenses, have lower housing costs. But here we have in the data evidence that it isn't lower. I don't know why it would be lower. Again, this is sometimes when you say this to people, they say, well, of course it's not lower. Why even do that study? Well, we do the study because that's the policy. The policy says they receive a reduced benefit. So yeah, there's no evidence suggesting that they have lower housing costs. So if that's the rationale for the reduced benefit, it doesn't make a lot of sense here.
It actually seems like maybe you have a slightly higher according to the stats here. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the tricky part, is that the samples that we're dealing with here are pretty small. And so when you get differences that are that small, it's hard to say, oh yeah, that's a real difference, right? So but one of the things that we did do is, if we increase our sort of the statistical power of what we're doing by saying, let's look at all students exclusively online versus students not exclusively on, so not veterans anymore, not students receiving GI Bill. We can get a larger sample size, and we can ask the data, are those students who are attending fully online, do they have lower housing costs? And no, they don't. And in fact, they do look a little bit higher. And so, and there, that's a place where we can say, yeah, there is a difference, and it's not going in the right direction, essentially, for the policy. So that's so again, we're starting to put some data to that rationale. Now, another argument might have been, again, we have to keep doing the argument might have been, that veterans attending fully online have higher incomes or more resources to pay for their education. I don't know, maybe that was it. I don't know. But we can also look at that in the data. We have the students' income and their family income, and we find that students attending exclusively online have lower incomes and fewer financial resources to pay for college. Now, the thing that's driving that, though, is, again, this whole thing that veterans are more likely to be independent students. So when we look at the data for what veteran people, now again, these may not be, this is another tricky thing when you're looking at data for GI Bill benefits. The person using the GI Bill benefits may not themselves be a veteran, right? Because the GI Bill, but yeah, right, it can be dependent. And here's what's really interesting: the incomes are higher among GI Bill recipients attending in person because you have some dependent students in there.
Right.
So what's really interesting, so this, again, it strikes me as particularly sort of upside down policy, where students who are dependents, who, I mean, they've rightfully, their parent has rightfully earned their benefit to the GI Bill and the housing benefit by all means, but they're in a better when they transfer that to their child. What we can see in the data is that they have higher incomes, and then on top of having the higher income and being part of the this household, they also receive a larger housing benefit than the students attending exclusively online, who are more likely to be independent. So when we look at just really quickly, when we look at just independents, we see that incomes are about the same. Independent GI Bill recipients, we see that incomes are about the same between those attending fully online and not. So they certainly don't have more income. And really quickly, we did look to see, well, do the students, the GI Bill recipients attending exclusively online, do they work more? Do they have more? Because maybe this was a rationale that those students had more time to work and earn more. Now, again, we can see it in the income. They don't necessarily have higher income. We did notice, though, that they do work more, but we were hesitant that work more while they're enrolled. So we see more hours worked among students attending fully online, but we were reluctant to include that as sort of we weren't sure which way the causality went there. Maybe they work more because their housing benefit is lower. So it's unclear which, right? I mean, so say like, oh yeah, they've got more time to work to cover their housing costs. Okay, but maybe that's not good, right?
Right.
We have evidence that working long hours while enrolled in school is not the greatest thing for you to help pay for school.
Yeah, so I think that brings me to my next question. So I think you've proven, or at least shown a lot of interesting data that shows that whether you're attending online or not, the need is there, perhaps even greater for those who are online exclusively to get these benefits. But what about outcomes? I mean, I think there's some concern that perhaps the reason why we are incentivizing folks to go to schools that are maybe better schools or have better outcomes or something like that. So were you able to take a look under the hood there and say, hey, is there an outcome data here we can draw from perhaps what would happen if we made more parity here?
Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, that may have been a rationale that fully online is of lower quality, and so sure, Congress will nod to it and provide you some benefit, but not the full benefit, and they'd just rather you be going to a different type of institution and a different kind of program. That may be, but we can now see, we can see actual data, right? We can see data on what people earn after they leave school. So we can see some outcomes, we can see some outcome data. And we think that when we look at earnings over time, we see, and what we do is we look at the institutions that are some of the largest institutions receiving the most GI Bill benefits. So we take the institutions with the 50 largest institutions in terms of receipt of GI Bill benefits. So this isn't necessarily like that most of their enrollees are veterans, but that they are receiving a large share of GI Bill dollars. And we can also see if they're predominantly online or not. We can see the share of their enrollees who are online. And then we can also see their earnings. 10, and I think in this case, 10 years post-enrollment.
And Jason, I'm showing the scatter.
Yeah, and so we present this as a scatter plot. We're only dealing with 50 institutions. We don't have student level data. We just have the institution. We have the outcomes at the institution. We don't have outcomes of GI Bill recipients. This is all the students who are there. So those caveats in mind, but there isn't a clear pattern. I mean, you can see that in the scatter plot. It's not as if the institutions that are largely online, that are popular among GI Bill recipients, have substantially lower earnings than those that are brick and mortar and in person. In fact, I mean, it's pretty all over the place. I mean, some of the exclusively online institutions actually have they have high earnings, and they also have low earnings, and the same is true for those that are, partly those that have a low share of students attending online. So and I always go back to this, if for policymakers, if the concern is that the students were, that the outcomes are weaker among online, you can measure outcomes now. These are things that policymakers can adjust and essentially say, if the outcomes among students are below a certain threshold, you wouldn't be eligible for GI Bill benefits. So you don't have to rely on sort of squishy, imprecise approaches such as having somebody's benefit because they attend online and you're not sure if that's a great approach to their education. So the other thing we look at, though, if we looked at student loan repayment rates as another outcome metric and did the same scatter plot and did the same thing. Now, I need to sort of a warning here on student loan repayment rates, right? Like earnings, I think, are probably the best measure for quality here, because what you're trying to do is say, well, did you have sufficient earnings to justify having made this educational investment? And student loan repayment is a little bit different, right? It's not directly linked to earnings necessarily. We also, we don't have outcomes information on people who didn't take loans. This is only people who have loans. So there's a whole bunch of issues with using loan repayment as the major way to judge an institution of higher
But
education.
if you, I'm assuming here on this scatter, you're using the same schools that we were just looking at for the year.
That's right. It's
So
the same
what's
50
interesting-
institutions.
What's interesting is, like you said, I would assume that your loan repayment would have a similar trend to how much your earnings were at the end, but it is not. It does seem to trend downward for online. That is interesting. Do you think that is simply a cost thing, or do you think there's something else going on here?
I mean, I think what you're seeing here probably is that the online institutions are maybe more expensive, and so people are borrowing more. Or the students may have less income, and so they're borrowing more. I mean, they we know here too, they may also receive lower benefits, right? And that's what's happening with the housing policy. You may need to borrow to help cover your living expenses under this policy. So if this metric, the student loan repayment, is the percentage of students, make sure I get this right, it's the percentage of students who have reduced principal. And so if you have a large balance, it may take you longer to start to dent the principal on your loan. And so what you may be picking up here is not necessarily that the education is of lower quality, it's that the loan balances are higher. Well, that may be concerning in and of itself, but it's not necessarily that this is that there's something that the students are getting a poor education in this case. So loan repayment, maybe, I mean, it does look like online again, lower rates. Now, when I say loan repayment, this doesn't mean that people are defaulting on the loans or they aren't paying them. It just means that they're taking longer to dent the principal on the loan. And I think we're looking at this like within the first few years of entry repayment. So it's not, again, it's not like a huge warning sign.
Okay. Yeah, but I do think that it makes sense, even more so. Kind of what you're saying is you're going to be online, and if that works for you because maybe you're disabled or for whatever the reason may be, you are looking like you have just as much a chance to get a decent income as you could at a non-online school. However, you're getting less benefits, and that may be acting as a drag on your ability to pay back because you got to take out more loans to cover down your living expenses or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly possible. I mean, we can't see that level of detail in the data, but it's certainly possible. I mean, it does look like, and I'll have to go back and double check the data. We did not include this in the paper. We didn't include borrowing statistics among students attending fully online. But I mean, it wouldn't be surprising to me if they're more likely to borrow more given the housing policy benefit, right? So, because they are eligible for federal student loans as well. And we do know that veterans take out federal student loans, even with the GI Bill benefit, even with the generous benefits, they still borrow. And so, I think that's certainly something for policymakers to consider if they're concerned about student debt levels, arbitrarily cutting housing benefits. For one, arbitrarily determining housing benefits. And then from that arbitrarily determined number, which is sort of the national average, regardless of where you live, that's why I mean arbitrary, not completely arbitrary, and then just cutting it in half. You could see why someone, a veteran, an older student, an independent, maybe they have dependents of their own. That's not unusual. In order to make this whole thing work, because they've got a reduced housing benefit, maybe they have to take more student loans. And so I think that's another sort of kind of perverse effect that the half housing benefit.
Yeah. I'd say hi everyone. So if you could start asking some questions here in the Q&A area there. You click on the button there, Q&A, you can start asking some questions. We'll get to them. Jason, you mentioned the study, a GAO report about disabled veterans in connection with the current policy and guidelines. Can you kind of talk on that a little bit? And your thoughts on, is this overlooking the disabled veteran community? I mean, you touched on a little bit, but maybe kind of dig in a little bit there.
Yeah, I just think I mean, it seems particularly out of step with, I mean, this is a population that, because of service, et cetera, and what they're asked to do and what's expected of members of the military. I mean, we see, you see rates of disability, but we have a whole system of compensating veterans for their disabilities and their rates of disability. And so, attending online is probably a really important option for them. And this again, and again, it seems particularly problematic to say, look, if you can somehow get yourself to one class, in your, any portion of your program, if you can make that in person, that could be worth thousands of dollars to you in your living expenses. And I don't know. I mean, it's sort of, I don't really like to try, imagine someone what they might have to go through, and that might be worth it to them. But it might be a huge strain too to have to go do that. And again, it doesn't seem like it makes much sense. It seems like it might harm that population.
Here we go. We got a question here. So if you offer MHA parity, what effect do you see this having on veteran students choosing online programs? Would you think we'd have more choosing online programs? If so, and maybe you could speak to this, I'm not sure the study does or not, but would that put more veterans at risk of enrolling low quality programs?
Yeah, so I'm sure there are some people that make decisions around this about not to attend exclusively online. I don't have a good sense of how many recipients that is. We can't see that in the data, and you're trying to get into like you'd have to have some survey where you asked veterans that kind of question. Don't have a good sense of that. I mean, in terms of the quality concern, I mean, I think what we point to in the paper is it's not clear to me that there is a major quality concern that arises just because something is exclusively online. I mean, remember, you can get the full housing benefit if everything but a small portion of your program is online. I mean, it would seem to me if there's a quality concern with fully online, maybe there's a quality concern. There should be an equal one there. I get the whole concern that like exclusively online might be a place where, where actual fraud is being conducted, but there's a whole bunch of checks in place to make sure that that's not what's happening. And I think those are the policies you want to rely on to sort of judge quality and whether or not the program or the institution is eligible for any of the money, not just the housing benefit. And that's why I'm like, I think the argument of we need to police quality, we need to ensure that online is high quality. That's one argument. And I don't think that like changing the benefits that the individual gets to try to somehow signal to them which one is higher, well, we don't even know. And that just doesn't make that much sense to me. But like I said, we don't see it in the earnings data. And what the typical earnings are of these institutions that veterans tend to go to, we don't see that simply attending an online institution is going to ensure that you receive lower earnings. I mean, there isn't really a pattern there. There are also institutions that offer almost no online that lead to very low earnings, at least among the institutions that we looked at. So it doesn't, it could go both ways. It's no guarantee. And again, I'll just stress, like, if you want to police quality, then we have the data to measure quality. You don't need to do it by changing people's benefits.
Right. We should just connect those two. I like that. In the data, this is a question I'm here asking you. I'll just read it verbatim. Did your findings show that an increase in MHA benefits for those attending online schools would have an impact on their graduation rates?
Yeah, so we are not able to, we weren't able to look at that. That's something like that. You're getting into in a sort of a causal study. We don't have the data to do that, or the bandwidth to do that kind of causal study. Is it correlating with a higher graduation rate? We can't tell with the data we have. Again, you need a bigger data set to figure out, and you've got a lot of confounding factors there. But you can, you could look at graduation rates among the institutions. And again, and graduation rates tend to be higher at more traditional institutions or institutions that are largely in person. We know that. The question is, and so that's something, if Congress is concerned, if lawmakers are concerned that graduation rates are low, then at certain institutions, they can set a cutoff of graduation rates for GI Bill benefits.
How about this? Is there any sort of correlation or maybe even causations improved through maybe income to graduation rate? Like the higher your income, the better your graduation rate, or the less you borrow, the better your graduation rate, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, so this is one of the challenges, right? We're trying to sort out, is it the online part that's doing the heavy lifting in making it unlikely that somebody graduates? I mean, like we see, there are lots of public institutions that are fully brick and mortar that have very low graduation rates. So, again, if graduation rate is the concern, then, I would regulate around the graduation rate. You certainly aren't helping things, though. You aren't helping people graduate. I don't think, you're probably hurting people's odds of graduating if you arbitrarily cut their housing benefit in half while they're attending online.
Right.
So again, yes, those are debates, and I think they're debates to have. But in relation to this policy that's in front of us, which is what should the housing benefit be for these individuals? That seems like a separate conversation. The quality conversation, quality assurance conversation. I don't think that changing the housing benefit is really an optimal way to try to ensure quality.
Okay. I'll ask you a question that I know I got from someone on the Hill who I was discussing our study with, and they basically want to know where kind of like your numbers, your budget on how you were able to get the numbers you had. So your study finds that basically giving parity would increase the annual GI Bill budget by like 1% or something. Kind of where did you come up with that number? And then I think there's some part where you actually said something to the sense of it could be different if we had better data. Kind of tell us how different. Are we talking about, a huge swing? Are we talking about like 0.5%? Or kind of walk us through that a little bit.
Right. So one of the things that we wanted to sort of get a sense of was, how expensive would it be to provide that veterans attending fully online just to give them their full housing benefit? Now, one of the challenges we have, is we can't look student by student and recalculate the benefit for them and then rerun the numbers, right? We're dealing with sort of top line averages and broader statistics than that. So which means we're looking at something more of a back of the envelope estimate. But what we find is that the increase would actually probably be pretty small relative to the size of the GI Bill benefits, right? So GI Bill benefits, all of them each year about $10 billion, right? Am I right, Steve? It's about 10 billion. And what we found is that we think that, again, this is a pretty rough estimate, and I can walk you through some of the details, but we think that the increase, if Congress were to allow a full housing benefit for students attending exclusively online, we think the increase in the cost of GI Bill benefit would be something like $100 million. And so, out of a $10 billion program, that's not necessarily a major increase. So here's how we come up with that, though, right? We know that, a certain percentage of GI Bill recipients are full-time, and are attending exclusively online, right? Remember that those are the people, they're the ones eligible for MHA, and they're the ones that who would have a reduced benefit that's brought up to parity status. And so we take those individuals and we say, okay, for that population, how much lower is their average housing benefit relative to those relative to those who receive a full benefit? And it's about $1,500 per GI Bill recipient. And so if you sort of add all that up, how many of them are there? How much money is that in total? We get to something like $100 million a year. Now, if a whole bunch of people decide to switch over and attend fully online because of this change, then that number goes up. But I don't. Again, even if it went up by 50%, it's still not a huge change in terms of the overall amount that's spent on the GI Bill. So yeah, so we think now I think my sense is, when I've shown people this number, is my sense is on Capitol Hill is that they believe that the number is much larger than this. And again, it's possible that the budget agencies have a lot more data than I do in order to create that kind of estimate. They may be estimating a behavioral change where more people attend fully online because of it. But I also think some of it is that, remember, Congress is they're in a 10-year cost window, right, that they've imposed on themselves. So they tend to look at to sort of internalize 10-year costs. And if so, I'm giving you a 1-year cost of $100 million. 10-year cost, right, is $1 billion. And if we're off by a little bit, so maybe it's a $2 billion or $1.5 billion. Well, on a 10-year estimate, that's a lot of money, right? Like, that's a significant amount of money. But remember, we're going to spend $100 billion on the GI Bill over the whole program. So, those are the ways that we looked at it and how we're able to estimate it. The difference between this is one of the tricky parts of this data, right? Is we talk about how the housing benefit, the monthly housing benefit for a fully online student is about $1,000, and each month, right? And that could be $1,000 less than it is for a student not attending fully online. But we see that the difference between those housing benefits in the data over a whole academic year is $1,500, right? So there's more going on here than just the straight mechanical, what's the average and what. So you can see in the data that the difference is actually smaller than if you were to just assume everybody qualified for the maximum amount.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. But still, we're still hovering around 1%. It sounds like even if we're off, we're not talking about a swing from 1% to 5%. It sounds like we're still in the
I would be skeptical. I would be surprised. Again, if someone's got a lot more data on this, but again, I don't think you're in. I don't think we're like talking like 500 million or $1 billion a year. Again, and it, 100 million makes that seems reasonable when you realize, that, only 17% of GI Bill recipients are attending exclusively online. And you have to be more than full time, you have to be more than half time to be doing that.
Right.
So just right there, you've narrowed it down to actually a fairly narrow portion of GI Bill recipients who are in this situation.
Cool. Can you think of any reasons to not provide parity other than the budgetary reasons? Is there anything you could think of, or the data has shown that you're like, oh, this might make some sense, maybe we should steer away from this?
The only thing, I would say if students who, this is the other thing, is that these are students who are attending full time, or close to full time. I mean, I might say if people who attend online are sort of like picking up a class here and there, and yeah, they're working full time, and their online education is something they just kind of do on the side. I could see an argument for saying, well, we need to reduce their benefit, right? Because they're not attending very intensely, and online means they don't have to like pick up and move. They don't have all these extra time commitments to try to get to class. I think that's a world where like a reduced housing benefit might make more sense. We're not in that world. It's possible that that's what lawmakers were thinking when they created the policy. But again, it also doesn't square with the fact that like you can't get a housing benefit unless you're attending, more than half time, which is generally full time. Okay? So these are basically full-time students,
Right.
So who qualify for the housing benefit. So it doesn't. I mean, you've already sort of made what could be a rationale for reduced benefit moot by only allowing the benefit if you're attending more than half time.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jason. I want to make sure I give everyone a few more minutes if they want to throw a question in there or not, but
Sure.
got a good thing there. Is there anything you want to add? Maybe something you wish you could have done a little more if you had a little more data access or a little more time or something like that? Is there anything that you wish a rabbit hole you wish you could have gone down a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice to have it'd be nice to have a larger sample of veterans in the data set, so we could better understand who the students are who are attending exclusively online, and those who are not. And it might help us figure out, why they're attending exclusively online. I mean, again, it is very anecdotal, but when this paper came out, a veteran came up to me at a conference and said, I saw that paper, and they said, that policy, man, that really, I mean, it nails single parents. And so I said, oh yeah, I said, yeah, because they're, a single parent, and they're going to go to school, and now they got kids at home, and they got to cover these housing costs, and they get half the benefit of somebody else, or less. And I really hadn't thought of it as a like, oh, there's people in these, and that might actually be the person who's most inclined to attend fully online is someone who's got kids at home, right? And so that's what I really wish we could figure out is more data on who these students are who are attending exclusively online.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the time, Jason, and for everyone attending. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. If you guys want to check out the site yourselves, you can, I think the Urban has it up on their site, but we definitely have it on the vep.org. So please check it out. And if you have any questions, reach out to us directly. We'd love to answer them. My email is just steve@thevep.org. Reach out to me. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again, everyone, for the time, and thank you, Jason, and the Urban Institute.
My pleasure. Thank you.